Okie dokie. Welcome, everybody. Hello. Welcome to the Tuesday night intro session. Hold on one second. Awesome. Welcome to the Tuesday night split introductory session. For anyone curious, my name is Michael. I am the CEO and co-founder of Esporter. Esporter creates Magic the Gathering and video game rec leagues where we set you up with 4 weeks of coaching with professionals, weekly individual replay review sessions, scrimmages with your pod, as well as group play opportunities throughout the month, and then it all culminates into a championship tournament for prizes. So if you are interested in what we got going on, we can tell you more about it. Come join our Discord, and you can ask us any questions, and we can kind of better understand what it is we got cooking over here at Esporter. So today we are going to talk about a quick refresher on Streets of New Capenna. I think there are enough people who are going to be coming back and playing the flashback drafts to Streets of New Capenna that it's definitely worth talking about. So we're going to kind of go through some of the good cards. We're going to do a quick refresher on some of the mechanics, and we're going to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with the whole set in general, so that you can go in there and draft your heart out and go kick some butt the first time you pop into a draft. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the format. So I think, as everyone remembers, or as I'm sure many of you remember from, as Streets of New Capenna was not very long ago, so I think everyone can remember that it was definitely a format where Brokers was best by quite a decent-sized margin. If we look at all the Brokers color pairs, which were green-white, 57.4, blue-white, which is 59.4, and Simic green-blue, which was also one of those color pairs, but it was like on the outskirts of both of them. All relatively high win rates when compared to the other color pairs. You can see that blue-black, which was effective. So you could see that leaning either Obscura or Maestros was a good secondary pool to be in, instead of if you got pushed out of Brokers for one reason or another, and that just wasn't open for your seat. Maestros or Obscura, black-blue, essentially playing good removal, the good blue cards. You were able to make good decks a lot of the time. So you could see that Azorius best performing deck in the format. Dimir, decent. Rakdos, fine. Gruul, pretty bad. Selesnya, also good. Orzhov, pretty good. Actually, above average and top 3 here, actually. Golgari, black-green, bad. Riveteers just wound up not really being the house that you wanted to go into. Simic, fine. Is it pretty awful? And Boros, so the Cabaretti mechanics being at 53%. And then you can see that those two, Selesnya and Azorius with the splash, so Brokers with the splash worked out pretty well. And then that's funny, the Simic, so the green-blue with maybe that little white splash actually worked out the best there. So these are just high level. The data doesn't tell us everything, but it's just a quick reminder that green, white, and blue were the strongest cards because of the strength of their commons. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the cards in the format and why these color pairs were so good compared to the others. And the biggest thing that we can start with is the fact that blue has a lot of just strong cards in general. So blue did a great job with tempo in this format. You can see here that Make Disappear, being able to get rid of your opponent's thing on 2. So if you're on the play, you get to get their 2-drop. If you're on the draw, you get to get their 3-drop. Excuse me. Yes, that's correct. So Make Disappear in this format where, people weren't really hurting you with their 2s all that much, went up pretty substantially. And there were a lot of spells that people wanted to cast, especially early in the format, that were high-cost spells. Everyone was, a lot of people were putting the exile, the house fixers behind their lands on 2, and people were kind of taking their time. This was a medium-ish format. It wasn't super fast, so Make Disappear often caught people off guard. And that's why cards like Rooftop Nuisance, being able to casualty it, out-tempo your opponent, out of the way, bounce spell, Pickpocket, another bounce spell. All of these tempo advantages that came from blue were particularly strong, and it kept your opponent playing off of curve. Can't also forget Majestic Metamorphosis, like we just saw in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, which was, the recent genesis of this type of effect of the, pump a creature, make it a 4/5, it's essentially removal with draw card tacked onto it. They made it, quote unquote worse here, but the fact that it flies is actually a pretty big deal as target artifact or creature. So if you're able to, ever make any kind of clues or any kind of treasures, you're able to turn that into a 4/4 angel and have it block and kill something and still draw a card. Revelation of Power, another card that was surprisingly strong for 2 mana. It's a format where there wasn't a ton of instant speed interaction, so you weren't often that punished for something like the Revelation of Power, and you often had shield counters or 1/1 counters in your Brokers decks, so this wound up getting Flying in Lifelink pretty regularly. Inspiring Overseer, maybe the strongest common we've ever seen printed in the history of Magic the Gathering. Like you see in Horizons, Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate, the Priest of Ancient Lore being like an absolute first pick, and it's just a worse Inspiring Overseer. So Inspiring Overseer is an absolute common bomb. First pick worthy and just a good card in general. Skycrier is another interesting one because it turned out in the format you were able to activate this ability on your opponent's end step, and you would kind of have the first crack at being able to cast the spell that you're going to draw. So the fact that it forced your opponent, or like you both get to draw, it's a drawback, but it wasn't like this awful game-breaking thing where it's like, oh, I'm giving my opponent resources, because oftentimes if you're casting that the turn before you're like trying to win, you're giving yourself additional resources to get through a good attack, and opponent might not get the opportunity to actually, use that thing that you put in his hand. So Skycrier, pretty reliable and desirable 2-drop, even though it's not even one of the best common 2-drops in the set. It's just good. And then the Echo Inspector turned out to be one of the best commons in the set, alongside the Inspiring Overseer. Just Blue-White had so many ways to fly and to filter and to move through the deck. It's a really strong deck that if you can get into and if it's open, winds up being very, very powerful. Very powerful and hard to deal with. And then some sleeper cards that I think were pretty exciting and good. Slip Out the Back was very, having a copy of Slip Out the Back, especially in my sealed pools, was a very welcome sight. A lot of the time, I would include that in a lot of my decks. And I also think the Boon of Safety does a good job of kind of blanking your opponent's removal spells. And the fact that you're doing that for 1 mana is pretty impactful. You know, in this format, had some, but not a ton of like true removal. So being able to blank that would often really put your opponent on the back foot. So what's the deal with red? How do you actually play red? It wound up being in the Cabaret colors. It was in Maestros. It was in Riveteers. So imagine on the ladder, it was very difficult to play Riveteers. So it's a pretty interesting conversation I've had a couple of times with people around how pod drafting for Streets of New Capenna is actually substantially different than drafting on the ladder is. On the ladder, you just wind up running into Busted Broker's deck after Busted Broker's deck. In a pod, it's a bit different because if you are passing someone all the good Riveteers cards, and there's only so many good Brokers cards to go around, you know, 3 average to slightly above, a below average, an average, and a slightly above average Brokers deck, oftentimes, like, the average and below average deck are going to lose to a busted Riveteers deck. So it's one of those things where the experience was vastly different when you were playing in pod and when you were playing on the ladder. So I actually am reluctant to say that, you know, Riveteers is even bad. I think that this whole format suffered from having to be played on the ladder. The fact that you couldn't play it in like your pod. So there was the option to do some like steal and stack stuff with Casualty. I rarely, if ever, got it to come together. Having the involuntary employment at uncommon made it so that, you know, being able to steal something in Casualty, it just wasn't really a high likelihood. Pugilist was awesome. Pugilist was like a first pick red card, and if you saw it late, totally a reason to potentially go up into red. Urbrask, also really, really good. Riveteers Requisitioner, really good. There were good cards in red, but it was kind of hard to make it consistent. If you were able to get the 1/2 Devil with Menace that gave something +1 when it attacked, or at the beginning of combat gives something +1/+0 or whatever it is, and Menace, I can't remember. That guy is also good at 2. Just like there were solid cards in red, but it just wasn't really that powerful of a color, and there wasn't really solid removal that would pull you into it. So these are some questions that people in our class ask. We're not going to go through those. If you guys want to get some specific questions asked, come join us. We would love to chat about this stuff with you live in person, go through some of these refresher courses, kind of take you through the journey of what it's like to be a part of one of these Esporter splits, kind of get the pro esports experience for the casual gamer. The lands. So the lands in this format were really interesting. They weren't necessarily incredibly powerful, but they were a way you could splash really powerful cards. It shook out that by the end of the format, this 3-color design set wound up being really just a 2-color format with, you know, ways to fix your mana so that you could splash some strong cards, but those pure 3-color decks definitely struggled at the higher ranks. Once you get, you know, high into platinum, into diamond, if you have like a 3-color pile, it's not going to win at the rate that you'd really hope it would. So unfortunately, you know, I don't know the right answer of how to fix it, but for this set, there wasn't really a whole lot of true 3-color decks with good mana. In order to play 3 colors, you would really want to find a way to have like 8 sources of each color, which is pretty tough. That's like getting 3 of these along with 5 of each of the other lands and running 18 lands kind of thing. So there's not really a good option. I guess you get 4 of the correct SNC like land here. and then run 4 of the other ones, and then, you know, 1 dual land, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, this works. Or if you get lucky, one of the rares. But just 3 colors didn't really work in this format all that well. Good lands, work well for Commander, work fine in Limited. Definitely not bad cards to fill up your graveyard. But in general, that was filling up your graveyard was good for the Dimir effect of having 5 different mana costed cards in your graveyard. But these lands were just a pretty low priority. The Skybridge Towers, the Botanical Plaza, these dual lands were a slight step up from the tricolored lands, just because you could cash them in later for a card. But they also equally weren't a super high priority. If you could get them, you'd play them. But I don't think they were cards that you really wanted to take. Some good cards in each of these colors here. We can actually take a peek at the 17 lands data to get a quick reminder on some of the best cards in the format. So you can see that the format as a whole is a little bit better balanced than Horizon's Baldur's Gate, because Baldur's Gate has some cards that have win rates in the 65-66% kind of thing. So you can see that as a whole, the format was relatively balanced, but there were still some really strong cards. So at common, we had the Jewel Thief, Inspiring Overseer, which we spoke about, the Jewel Thief, Rafine's Informant, really, really strong 2-drop here. When you came in, you would Connive, which was draw a card and discard a card. If you discarded a non-land card, put a 1/1 counter on this creature. And oftentimes, late in the game, that allowed you to, filter through your deck to get to your bombs, or often it was just, toss a spell and you have a 3/2 on 2. So at common, this is a hugely powerful card. And you can see that there's, 2 commons in the top 3 best cards in the set. Make Disappear, the fact that you could casualty it to make your opponent pay 4 meant that it was often a 2-mana hard counter spell, and it just really fit well within the tempo of the format. The fact that people were kind of taking a little bit longer to cast bigger spells often wound up being really strong. Gathering Throng, an awesome catch-em-all. It's just the 3/1 body. If you can ever make it fly, it's just, there's a lot of ways to make this good, and the fact that you could go and sometimes get 2-3. If you play a Gathering Throng and can go get a single other Gathering Throng, I think it's worth playing. If you can get 2 or 3, it is a must include. If you get 3 in your whole build or 4, then you have to play this card. It's incredible. Civil Servant. There was a pretty common play pattern in this format of like, all right, turn 2 Civil Servant, turn 3, what's his name? The give a plus white guy, give a +1 backup agent. Turn 3 backup agent onto your Civil Servant. Now you tap your backup agent, making it a 4/4 with lifelink, and swing on turn 3 for 4, gain 4, and it was just like, well, the game's done. Well, that was fun. I guess that was us playing Magic together. So it could be incredibly powerful in the right decks, and it was not hard to activate this card. So Civil Servant wound up being a really strong, decent 2-drop. Broker's Hideout, you can kind of see how this is probably a product of just being in so many Brokers decks that won a lot. I don't think this card is necessarily so much better than all the other lands, but I think it just wound up in a lot of good decks that won a lot. Girder Goons, really great. I think people pegged this early on as being one of the best black commons. You could do a pretty cool thing for 6 mana where you did this, and then you were able to play the card that brings it back from the graveyard. So you'd play, I can't remember the name of it. It's 2 mana to play it, but it's here, we can take a quick peek at black. It was Fake Your Own Death. Fake Your Own Death, yep, you could see that if you did this plus Girder Goons, it was a pretty fantastic combo. You know what, we'll take this color by color. We'll look at the top 3 or 4. We'll look at everything above 55, and then we'll talk about why they're good. All right, so if we look at white real quick, Overseer, Rafine's Informant, Gathering Throng, Skycrier, great. Backup Agent, great. These are tied. I would take my first Backup Agent over my first Skycrier. It definitely depends on the deck you're in, but this 1/1 counter, because a lot of cards care about counters, wound up being pretty substantial. It really depends, but these are both really solid 2-drops. Dapper Shieldmate, great. Revelation of Power, again, because there's not a ton of instant speed removal, this is pretty good. Hold for Ransom wound up being pretty powerful as well. And then Boon of Safety is really like the last include here. You would play Speakeasy servers now and again, but the life gain was pretty inconsequential. 5 mana for a 3/3 body wasn't really what you cared about. Rafine's Guidance also similarly is just, you don't really care about this having a... This is not good enough to take up a slot in most decks. Kill Shot, because it's destroy target attacking creature, just didn't really line up to get the thing you needed to when you needed it, when you needed to kill it. This is nice that it exiles, but it was just too expensive. Sorcery Speed gives your opponent a treasure token. There were too many things that made this problematic to actually be good. Celebrity Fencer, I've only seen it really pop off in an Alliance deck once or twice. So in a Cabaretti Alliance deck, it's not that good of a card. So white, very, very powerful in the format. Great in part of the two most powerful decks in white, blue, and white, green. But that... I think that is just a product of, again, the ladder play. I think that there's a lot more... There are many more viable decks in the format if you were to play like in pot or in a pool. But on the ladder, it's okay to lean towards what is the most powerful. So here we have Make Disappear, Echo Inspector, we talked about those two. Run Out of Town. This is just a good ability. The owner of target non-land permanent puts on top or bottom of their library. It like quote-unquote time walks your opponent, so it forces them to retake their turn. Maybe they have to cast that same spell again. People equate it to removal, but the fact that it's instant speed is super powerful. So maybe like they go to attack in, think they have lethal, you're able to run out of town something, essentially negating their next draw, and maybe stopping them from having lethal, and then you get to have the next turn to crack back. Majestic Metamorphosis, we talked about how this is super strong, like a suit-up variant. Disdainful Stroke. The reason this was so good in this format was because there were the family fixers that we were talking about earlier. So that's we'll take a quick peek at those. They were also at common. Spar's Adjudicators is the example of the Brokers one. This is the only one that was kind of worth playing. You can see the Glamorous Outlaw is like right on the fringe of playing, but you weren't often in Maestros. If you're in Maestros, I actually do think that this deal 2 damage and scry 2 is pretty useful. But the Adjudicators was the only one that was like, oh, this is an actively decent card, good card in my decks. Okay, so let's go back real quick to blue. Stroke. Lackey was one of those cards I think early on people thought were going to be great. It's 2 for 1, but the casualty, like getting this on 1 to be able to casualty it on 3, it took a lot for it to come together for only a little bit of value. So it turned out to be just fine and not anything too exciting. Nuisance was a good card if used well. It really could swing the game in your favor, tapping down their blockers, swinging, they're locked down for next turn, you draw 2 cards. I've actually used this card to really great effect, so I really am a fan of this one, and it seems almost a little bit... It's a tough card to use because you have to like sacrifice your own things, but if used properly, I think that this has a lot of potential. Veteran, take it or leave it. Bypass, not really playable. Bruiser, fine include as a 2-drop if you have to. Witness Protection is one that I actually think is like a nice sideboard card in best of 3. I think maybe it's a little better than this data suggests at 53%. Case the Joint, just raw card draw. You don't really care about that because there's other ways to accrue value through Connive. Crocodile, just don't need it. This top end's unnecessary, and Snoop is kind of baloney. Even though I have seen a lot of people include this in their decks, like high-level people who I know are good, but I personally don't think it's all that great. Murder, instant speed removal, obviously good. Corrupt Court Official in this format is good, not great. You definitely would want them, but yeah, I was about to say, it's interesting. It's saying that they're pretty substantially better than the Custodians. I think in this format, the Corrupt Court Official is not nearly as good as the Virus Beetle was in Kamigawa. So although you see this effect, you're like, oh, this is going to be awesome, kind of wound up just being okay in this format. And I think that's because a myriad of factors. There's a lot of ways to draw through your deck. There's a lot of ways to get to the gas. In some decks, you were helping your opponent if you were filling up their graveyard with the card of their choice. So I think there's a bunch of reasons why it wasn't as good. It's still good, obviously, 56% win rate, but as you can see, it's not that good. Deal Gone Bad was nice because it got around the shield counters at instant speed, so I was a big fan of Deal Gone Bad. dig up the body and you see how things kind of get relatively unplayable after the Revel Ruiner. Cutthroat Contender, Extract the Truth, not gonna play it. Assassin. Assassin, I don't actually think it is 50% win rate bad, but it's definitely not like a high include. Be interested if that changed at all. Yeah, when you're looking at just top players, their win rates are naturally going to be higher. You can see it moves up in the rankings of like where it sits by like 2 spots. Demons do essentially unplayable. Join the Maestros. You don't want to play it. Incriminate also. Yeah, Black had a lot of junk, but Black had some like Girder Goons, Murder, Fake Your Own Death, Corrupt Court Official, all fine. Relatively shallow, but it did have some good uncommons and rares backing it up. Red definitely got hammered in this format. So Red had a really tough time. Strangle is the only one with over 55% win rate, and that is pretty painful to see. Maybe I need to back the data up. When did Streets of New Capenna come out? I've looked at this up before April 29th. Yeah, so we are capturing all the data from the start of the format. So yeah, Mayhem Patrol is the other good red card that we're talking about. Jockey is pretty fine. Magician's fine in these Cabaretti decks, but behind that, like, yeah, Antagonize could totally work. Line 'em Up was not that good. The 2 damage didn't wind up killing a lot of things that you cared about. Wrecking Crew, not that good. Roastmaster, I have seen Roastmaster, like a pile of Roastmasters, win some crazy games when you start playing that with like Exhibition Magicians and ways to make 1/1s. But really, this whole deck just never really came together. I would err on the side of caution when drafting red. I would say that you want to be in red for your uncommons or your rares. So like with Fight Fixer, Professional Facebreaker is awesome. If you get Facebreaker, you definitely can splash it and be in red. One of our creatures you control deal combat damage to a player. Create a treasure token. Sack a treasure, exile top card of your library, you may play it this turn. So it's just a good attacker. It makes your opponent double block it. You know, if you happen to have an Antagonize in hand, all of a sudden this is a 6/6, and your opponent's double blocking and getting blown out. Jaxus also, when played, Jaxus is one of those cards that has a huge delta between the average player and the top players. Yeah, 62% versus, what was it, 53%? And that's because Jaxus is a high skill ceiling card. Discard a card, create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card. Sack at the beginning of the next end step. So if you play it out on 4 and you're able to kind of do this repeatedly by discarding a bunch of lands and getting, you know, copies of Girder Goons or anything that's meaningful, you do get ETB as well as on death triggers. So it's a pretty sick card if you could do it with the right combos. So there are rares and uncommons that make you want to play red, but for the most part, like, I think you're kind of looking to stay away from it. It's just not really all that exciting. So let's take a peek at green. Green, I actually did like green a lot in the format. Jewel Thief for the family. Surprise overperformer with For the Family. Warm Welcome, nice card draw spell. Strong Arm, just a decent top end. Prize Fight, this is where things start to fall off a little bit. Yeah, Prize Fight's playable, but not that good. Again, this is what I'm saying. There wasn't a whole lot of instant speed interaction that your opponents were like excited to play. It's just like wasn't all that good. Rox Pummeler, Gardener, Socialite, Social Climber, Capenna Express, all these you're not trying to play these cards down at the bottom. I really think behind the Strong Arm, it's like, all right, do I really want to play these? So really what you're looking to do is take advantage of all these powerful multicolored spells. So Initiate's probably the bottom of like, do I want to play this? But Outlaw, Newsy, the best ones really were Civil Servant, Regulator, and Newsy. Those were the ones where you were like really happy to play those multicolored. You were happy in your blue-black, your blue-white, or green-white decks. Body droppers also could be pretty good in the right decks. What else do we need to consider from Streets of New Capenna? So some of the rares, some of the high value first pick rares, we should take a quick peek at those. Hostile Takeover is a reason to go into Maestros. Maestro's Diabolist. Maestro's Diabolist. Definitely also a good card that sometimes wheels late. These are reasons to be in Maestros and to splash red if you are black-blue. Broker's Ascendancy, absolutely broken, rare. When it lands, if you put it out on 3, its opponents will just concede immediately. Dancer's an incredible card. But I'm surprised its win rate is so high because it was in Cabaretti. Because Cabaretti lost at such a high clip, I'm surprised that it actually retained such a high win rate. Rigo, great 3-drop, comes in with a shield counter, draws cards for you. Very, very good. Interceptor's nice. I seldom saw people flashing in and actually like get this to be a counter spell. Because when it enters, it connives, and when it connives, return to one target spell to its owner's hand. So you can do it while something's on the stack and your opponent's tapped out. You can use it as like a counter, or you can use it as like something to bounce something to their hands. So it's got a lot of flexibility. It is good. It's one that I actually never saw get played all that well, and I think that's because people weren't in Obscura all that often. Evelyn the Covetous. There's a couple of reasons at rare why you should be Maestros. This is just like a couple of really strong cards. Soul's great. Toulouse also similarly to Interceptor. I haven't actually seen people use this that well against me. Whenever you discard cards, exile them. When it dies, put the exiled cards into the owner's hand. So if you're conniving a whole bunch, you actually wind up drawing a ton of cards. Heartstabber, good early card, and Zeotor's Envoy. And then, yeah, it starts to level off a little bit of, like, how meaningful some of these rares are. And then at Mythic, what pulls you into certain things? Yeah, Rafine. Rafine's incredible. Strongest Mythic in the set by a whole lot. Warps, standard, all around her power. And Zeotora. Zeotora is interesting because you, like, don't really want to be in red-green or black-green. So you kind of have to be black-red and then splash-green if you want to play her. But yeah, I've actually seen her wheel 3, or not wheel, but like get to 3rd, 4th pick and no one really cares. And Obnixilis. And I guess Falco's also really good. So it seems like just about all the mythics in this set, minus the Meaning of the 5, are pretty playable. Lord Xander is also playable, even though he's not as strong as what we see here. All right, so this is a nice little quick opportunity to do a refresher course for everyone regarding what we have coming up on the docket for Streets of New Capenna. Again, my name is Quente, Michael. If you have any questions about what we got going on here at Esporter, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm Quente in our Discord. I'll put that in the chat for anyone who wants to check it out. So don't hesitate to come join us. We would love to have you become a part of our community. And if you want to come join us in our sessions led by professionals, we would love to have you. Thanks again for everyone who's been watching today. Definitely appreciate all of your attention. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I appreciate you guys and have a great rest of your day. I'm Quente, signing off. See ya.